Hi, I'm Charles, and I'm a beekeeper that loves old bee equipment. Today, we are going to be repairing and revitalizing an AI root standard smoker, which, frankly, had a very rough life. You can see that it was mailed to me in pieces. The AI root standard smoker is aptly named as it indeed set the standard for all the smokers that have come after it for the last 120 years. We'll discuss a little bit about why that is. Hello there. What we have here is a smoker in rough shape, and I can tell by looking at it immediately this is an AI root standard smoker. A few things I can also tell from it. It is sometime before the 1940s because they still use nails on the brackets, and that can go all the way back to around 1905 when the standard was released. It also has the square washers right here, excuse me, the square bolts here with the lock washers, which they use those up into the mid-1930s. One of the things that is impeding me aging it is really the fact that I just don't have the stamp here. Traditionally on the back of the bellows you'll have the AI root stamp, and depending on what stamp they use, it'll help you age it. Mr. James Thompson is going to be releasing an article that breaks it down pretty thoroughly what the different stamps mean time-wise. But there really are three predominant ones among the oldest AI root equipment. I can't even see the indication of what it was, and I'm going to keep looking to see if there's a little bit of the stamp left under there, but it looks like they painted the whole smoker black at some point. You may think, wow, Charles, that smoker looks terrible, and you should just put it out of its misery and throw it in the garbage. Well, this is a 100-year-old smoker, and I would like to repair it and put it back into use and have it looking beautiful again. Honestly, all the parts are here. We have everything we need. We just need to replace the leather for the bellows. And another thing that's helping me age it is this isn't true leather, so it's not the earliest of root smokers. But once again, I think this guy is sometime around the 1920s. So our strategy is to get the brackets off, disassemble the smoker, throw all of the metal parts into citric acid for about 72 hours, get the rust off of it. In the meantime, we'll clean up the wood, make it look real nice. See if we can even make a sticker for AI root that emulates one of the old stickers, and then we'll put everything back together. But I assure you, things are in pretty good shape. They're just filthy and in need of a little repair. Every time I try to film me taking out one of these pins, I always mess it up. So we're gonna give it a try. Let's try it this way. Here we go. A little dab will do you. Don't really need much. Alright, let's get it in there real nice. Now let's see if we can get this out with a little bit of love. Yep, and that is indeed a brass pin. Why did they use a brass pin on a tin smoker? Typically it's the copper smokers that'll have the brass pin, but honestly they probably ran out of parts that day and decided to use a brass one. Yeah, this definitely isn't copper, but we'll see what is under it. Now, these lock washers are real neat, and I've only ever seen them on these smokers. I'm not a tool restorer typically, so I'm sure they exist in other places, but you bend the little arm up and then you can undo the bolt to it. And since the bellows is busted, we can actually use the screwdriver on the other side, and it's a little easier to take it off. I've already lifted a little notch on the lock washers. If you have one where the bellows, the leather on it is just done, you're definitely changing out the leather, there's no patching of the leather, you might as well just tear the bellows off, and then you can use the screw in the back, because it's so much easier to get this thing off, to screw it than to try up front, because I've run into the problem time and time again that maybe this wasn't done tight enough and it causes me some problems to where I really need that screw to be able to get the leverage to undo this. Okay, let's keep on screwing this. We got this one below, because there's always 2 screws. There's never one. Rust and crud in between the flathead there, so I'm gonna use this kind of dental pickish tool to get that out of there. Let's try a thinner one right here. I think this will do better. Yep, well, I'm getting grip, but it's on there tight. And you got to be careful because you don't want to strip these. You get one good shot, and if it doesn't go well, you're gonna end up in a position you don't want to be. All right, we're gonna try an even thinner one. All right, we're getting a little pressure down on it, and that seems to be working to loosen it up. I can get a little bit at a time. But we might go over this with a file a little bit to make the notch in the flathead just a little bit deeper. That way it doesn't get stripped in the future when we put it back in. Because just like all the other parts, we're going to have to get rust off this one too. Oh, that guy was definitely a pain, but we got it out and we got this off, which this looks a lot like one of the earlier hooks. One of the pieces down in there is the fire plate. Sometimes I call it a grill, and it's in the bottom. It's normally easy to use a screw and screw it into one of the holes because it doesn't really cause damage, and then you can pull it out like that. Something to keep an eye on is at the very bottom of the smoker, we have a little bit of rust deterioration right here. There's a part of me that thinks maybe we can get a little bit of rust converter out and put it there. Something, but we're going to give it a bath in citric acid and see how it comes out. I'm also a little concerned because the seam right here is coming loose because of some of that same deterioration. We don't want to be real heavy on the wire wheel right there. Next part of the process is actually among the slowest. That's where I have to pull out every single nail here. And there are close to 40 nails on these usually, and these guys are tiny, and you don't want to drop them because they will stick you in the foot. So I have this great magnet right here that I toss them to. Now the goal is to pry it up just enough to where the nail rises and you can grab a hold of it with pliers and pull it off. You don't want to just try to rip it off, or you will destroy it. And there are occasions where I have bumped into brackets which were so rusty that I wouldn't dare try to pry them up. I would have to create new brackets either out of leather or metal. And I'm not a metal worker, so how would I make metal brackets? Well, you could steal them from other smokers that are less deserving. Especially if you have part smokers like me, but that's impractical unless you're a smoker collector. So one of the solutions is actually going on Etsy and going to some of the jewelry stores, and you can actually get metal banding. I have copper banding, which I've used on some smokers, and it looks really good. It looks better than what it did from the factory for the smoker originally. When they made these bellows, they would put a few nails in after they put the leather on, and then the brackets came on. You would secure it already with a few nails. I'm going to take all this old crud off. Woo! That's been on there for 100 years. We're seeing shadows of the original wood. That's pretty cool. We're seeing the inside here. Spring, it's rusty, but it's in good shape. We don't need to fool with that. And I don't feel the need to pull that out to sand this side. Because it's in the smoker, I'm not going to sand it. I'll clean it, but I'm not going to sand it. I'm not sure if you're going to be able to see this on camera, but we also do have a split in the bellows that is broken along here. And we're going to put a little wood glue in that and clamp this overnight. This is the hole that the air from the bellows is going to blow out of. This is the inner panel. I'm going to do the same thing here, but I'm not going to film it because frankly we just did this, and the bellows are the thing you spend the most time with during this whole process. Well, we've broken it down to the key components of the smoker, broken it down to the fire chamber, the top, the ignition plate, or I just call it the grill, the brackets, and the bellows panels. And you need the spring inside of it. Now, I've been asked, how much citric acid do you use? For a bucket this big, which is, I think, a 1 or 2 gallon bucket, that's about as much as I use. And I just eyeball it. I might have used way too much there. If I notice it's not really working well for me, I'll just add more later. It's okay. Put those brackets in first. Then we'll put our big smoker in. And this will float until you fill it. There we go. Got our top in there. And our igniter plate. And I don't want to put these on the bottom. These are all the screws and hooks and everything. So we're just going to fill that a little bit with the citric acid and pour a little bit. That needs a little bit more. There we go. And I'll pour a little bit separate in there, just to make sure it's working. Let's say that this was just really dirty and it had a logo on it that we wanted to save. Well, by all means, we would come at it a different way. We'd probably wash it with soap and water. I would avoid a lot of those wood antique cleaners because they have faded some of my stamps that are on the back of these things, because I think the stamps are all alcohol based. Now this is the heartbreaking one, because this is where the stamp would go, and I just don't see any of the stamp. Once again, it's heartbreaking because I love seeing them. And we'll do something at the end so people can tell what kind of smoker it is in the future. But let's clean it up. You can see on this one where the crack is a lot more apparent up here. So we'll put a little bit of wood glue in that, put it back in the vise, and let it sit until we're ready to deal with it. Now right here is the inside of that crack, and we're going from the inside of the board because wood glue can stain a little bit. You can sand it down and then try to hide it, but I want as little on the other side as possible, especially because my work can frankly be a little bit ugly. I want to get it as good as I can into that crack by pulling it apart and not necessarily flooding the joint with it, but making sure that there's plenty oozing into it, and then we can wipe off the excess. There we go, that's how much I wanted. And now that we have it clamped, the joint is overflowing a little bit, and we'll leave it like that, and it'll bring more integrity back to the panel. Alright, I solved my issue. I don't have a square nut that exactly fits the bolt that the square nut went flying for, but I do have some additional AI root hardware. They are different sizes. You can't quite see it on the camera, but this one is a bit bigger. But we have something that'll work and is just not noticeable. Our next move is to patch this down along here, because there's a little bit of area that the rust rotted away, and there's a tiny bit right here too. Once again, I don't think you can see it on camera, but those are things that we have to deal with before we paint over it. The bottom is the most concerning part, because we don't want ash or anything coming out of the bottom here that could ignite anything. To patch that, we're going to use some steel stick. This you can patch metal with. That tin will do just fine. This is a putty that you can use. You'll more or less just jam it along the hole and then sand it down and then paint over it. It's very effective, and they do make stuff that's heat resistant. As far as products go, they do make a heat resistant patch, but this has worked fine for me. So I haven't had the need to purchase it. Well, we're going to cut off just a little bit. There we go. And here it is right here. But you have to knead it. You pull the plastic off. Then you just squeeze it, mix it together. You want to get it more or less one solid color. You can roll it and keep rolling it back over into itself, and that'll make the chemical reaction that tells it to harden. All right. So we have it the consistency we want. So we're literally just going to put it down along here in strips. It's not going to be pretty, but it's in a place where it won't be as noticeable on the smoker. We're going to make sure that we get the top up here, squeeze it in, and then we got along the bottom as well. Alright, and there we are. We put some along the bottom there. It's really hideous now, but it will be a little less hideous after the sanding, and then a little even less hideous after that, after we paint this. Okay, we're 24 hours later, and it's hard. So we'll give it a little bit of sanding to smooth it out a little bit. Here we are. So we got it smooth enough. There's a little bit of a raise on there, but that's okay. It doesn't really need to be perfect. One of the common issues with all smokers is that the mouthpiece gets all bent up. I like to use a pair of pliers and just gently come around and round it off again, because once again it doesn't have to be perfect. Just don't want it to be the first noticeable thing when you look at it, really. A pair of duck-billed pliers is often the best tool for this because it flattens it. One of the things that I would like to avoid painting is the hinge on here, because it's in great shape, it's beautiful, it's nice and tin, and we're just going to take some painter's tape, we're going to wrap it up real nice and cut it, that way everything is done well. I'm going to apply this guy right here. Try to get it down as far as we can, that way we can come with a utility knife and cut neatly around it. Okay, almost there. Alright, we have the hinge covered up, so we can paint this little guy and make it look good. And here we are. We got this one painted. You can see where we have the fill-in right here, and I could have made that prettier. I'm just bad at it. Here's the top. Right now I'm having a problem that my cat is bumping the stand on the bottom and will not stop accosting me. Kitty, stop. Kitty, I'm gonna pet you. I swear to Christ. Just let me do this for the viewer. Let me do this for the viewers, Kitty. I promise I'm gonna put this in the final cut. There we are. Nice. All right, let's pry this little bit off here in the corner and see if we can just pull it off in one piece. There we go. Okay, it's looking good thus far. I'm happy with that. All right, let's pull this off and so when it ends, we're going to look close to that. But we're going to have this really cool brass pin that feeds in there. Now I thought, you know, what could I do? Because I was going to paint the brackets black, but I found out that the bellows brackets don't have black paint for them. And I could have used regular spray paint since they don't get heated up the way that the fire chamber does. But, you know, I just painted them black. That's fine. But I think I'm going to use nails that have that same golden color to them. And we're back at reassembly time. Now, there are some times that I have used resin to make sure that these don't twist when I put them in. Right now, they're just tight enough to where I can screw them in well, but not this one, which I'm going to put at the bottom. Yeah, right, the bottom's right here. I don't want it to where if I'm trying to tighten it on the other side, I can't. So my choices are I could fill that hole and re-drill it, or I could do something crafty like adding a little bit of resin and making this nice and tight together, and that way I can screw on from the other end, because I also don't want to accidentally have it fall inside the smoker, inside of the bellows after I make it. That would be bad news. That would be very bad news. Alright, we have the pieces we need in. That way, once we seal this up by putting leather over the bellows, we're not going to have access to those screws anymore. If one fell in, it would be a really big deal. So this is how it's just going to have to work out. Here we are. This is a Root standard smoker bellows template that I have. They're not hard to make. If we had to make one, we would more or less wrap the bellows itself and measure it out. But I find I get the best results when I do it this way. In the past, I used to kind of wing it with pieces and then trim them down. But I find once I made a little template out of cardboard, that was the best way to go. Brief pro tip here. Trace it on the inside of the leather, or use chalk when you do it. I like to use a Sharpie, which if it was really cruddy leather, it might bleed through because it's an alcohol-based pen, but I haven't had that with what I use. I'm going to use my trusty leather shears, which are made for leather. They do a darn good job. What I use for this is specifically leathercraft glue, and you may ask, why? Why would you use leathercraft glue? Because if you use many other different types of glue, like rubber cement and things like that, it cracks as you squeeze the bellows, and it makes a noise. Leather glue stays nice and silent. Putting our first piece on here, we're going to attach this with a couple of old nails. And I could staple this in, that'd be fine. I just don't have a working stapler at the moment. It is authentically also how they did it, but if we were going for authentic, would the smoker right now be bright green? No. We are revitalizing it. We're putting it back to work. To revitalize something, that means to breathe life into it again and get it functional. To restore something is to get it back with original parts if possible, and there's levels of restoration there. Right now our goal is just to drive in a few nails and get it to stay on the bellows. Now it doesn't have to be perfect. You want to get any slack out. But if there's a little bit of overlap on the edge, don't worry about that. You can cut that off at the end. You can cover up the sins of it not being perfect through a few ways. And that's one of them. One of the others is the fact that, you know, a metal bracket is going to go on top of these. And if you have some type of flaw that you want to hide, make it in a way to where you can hide it doing that. I'm going to put a fourth nail in here. And we're putting them in places that the bracket nails aren't. Another thing I'm asked is, why do I have to glue it? The glue that was on these did not hold up over 100 years. Well, those are some very high standards for really glues at the time. It would be my hope that using the modern synthetic glues, that these will do better than the original glue that was used to secure the leather on these bellows. I mean, some of it's held together pretty well for natural glues, but my hope is these synthetic ones kind of stand the test of time and help. The bottom's kind of special here. Here I have some nylon that we're going to do along the bottom, and these simulate some canvas pieces that used to be used along the bottom. I tend to save those from old bellows when I do recover them. It's part of it that I reuse, but I just don't have any at the moment. So I'm going to cut one here that'll work just fine for that purpose. And the main purpose of it is, like canvas, this breathes a little bit better. You'll know that, by observing other smokers, that a lot of them have inlet holes and things like that to be able to suck in more air. Well, this is kind of the inlet hole at the bottom. It breathes enough to be an inlet. Now, originally when I started my channel, I was repairing an antique extractor from some years ago, and I just wanted a place to show off the work, really. But, the channel has grown a tiny bit, and started out with just antique smokers, but I like to try to see what equipment I can add, and on top of it, I like talking about bees and some of the history of beekeeping and the different options that beekeepers have as far as equipment. So you're going to see a lot more of that and a lot less time of me knocking together old bellows of things. I'll be honest with you, I repaired so many of these last year that I became very bored about coming and doing needed repairs to smokers. Now, a modern smoker I might not repair unless it was something that was very unique and cool, or it was something that I really cared about. Like one to the first kit that my wife bought me when I got into beekeeping, for example. I repaired that one, and that is a cheap Chinese smoker. That thing, it's held together by hopes and dreams and leather glue. Well, we're going to put on the second one now, and I always start along the bottom, because that piece of canvas right there, it kind of doubles as a little bit of a hinge. It makes the bellows a lot more sturdy, so we're going to attach that. And even before we get the brackets on and really knock it in with some good nails, more or less the bellows will be functional. Well, this is where I messed up, kids. And I only noticed it after putting it together. This is upside down. The inlet hole should be on the bottom. So I have a couple rough choices to make, and I'll figure it out when we get there. I could put the bellows on it upside down, which would work. It would work just fine that way. Or I can fill this in with wood filler and drill a new one up here. I don't know which one I'm going to do yet. I'm going to workshop the what I'm going to do when I get there, but my only other choice is to tear all this off and waste this leather, and honestly, that's more complicated than either drilling a new hole or just turning it upside down. Well, I spent a lot more time cursing over putting that on upside down than I thought I would have. But honestly, I don't think it's going to leave that much of an issue. We're going to do it right side up. We'll drill a new hole for it, but we're going to find out where that hole needs to be, which this will be a first for me, and we're going to fill the other hole, which will take about 24 hours, but patience. That is a virtue extremely important to beekeepers. And I'm going to cut off the excess here. But remember that there are things that you have to handle in a timely function, and there are things that, you can wait because I want to move on to other projects. But I'd rather do it right, or at least do it better. I don't want to go with there's a black and white always. But I know if I let this dry properly and let the fill-in dry on the other side when I fill that hole, that I can sand it down and make it to where it's not as noticeable. And so you won't really see my error unless you're looking for it. And remember this, as a craftsman or an artist, when you make an error on something, it's where your eyes automatically go every time. But that's not how the world sees it. That's not how everybody else sees it for the most part. They tend to look at the more grand parts of it. Now, there are places you want to mess up less, like you don't want to make errors along the top of a bellows because it's much more noticeable on a smoker, because it's what you're looking at when you work it. But you can obscure your errors in some ways and obfuscate them, but know that your eyes are always going to go to them. And that's okay, but do realize that, once again, the way that you observe it as the creator or as the person working on it is not the same as the way those are going to see it. And here we go. You now have a functional bellows. The air is shooting out, and it does work. And when you do it this way, it's immediately functional, but when the brackets go on this, that's going to make this extra tough. We are going to use these little brass nails and hope that they have enough teeth to do what we need them to do. Alright, we are going to get these on here now. And once again, we want patience for this. And one thing I use for that is I like to hold the nail with pliers because it's such a small nail. We're going to drive it in. Well, there's the first one. I reckon we got at least 40 to go. So I'm gonna save you watching me assemble the whole bellows this time around, but we'll be back at the end. Very proud of the first row of brass nails. It looks pretty good. I'm still a little funny about having a red bellows with green here because it looks like Christmas, but you know, that works. Maybe I should have went with black, and maybe on hand I should have had a different color leather here, like brown or something, more earthly, especially if I was going to go with the green, but you know, this works. Now here's our dilemma. Now that this is complete, in great shape, our dilemma is if we seal this hole and do another one down here, the screws aren't lined up the way they should, and the result we're going to get is this awkward arrangement where it doesn't lay nearly flat enough. Now that's not too big a deal. We could live with that, but it's not the way that the smoker's meant to be. This is the way a AI root standard smoker is supposed to be. This is one from the 1930s. It has the later root logo on it. You can see it's entirely the same smoker. The only difference is that the hook piece on the back. This is the old style one, which you can see in the patent from about 1905, and in a lot of the art for the first half a decade that they made this smoker. So this is an older version of it. We have a dilemma if we're going to fill it or not. Honestly, I'm just going to put it on upside down because it lays flush well enough and looks pretty cool still. So I'm just going to do it that way. Alright, got the second one on. I love these old lock washers. These are really cool. They really helped with the square bolts and kept them from twisting so that they never came loose. The fact that there are so many AI root smokers still out there and still used by older beekeepers that have them and inherited them, it's a testament to the smokers themselves. They were incredibly durable. They weren't cheap. In 7 years in beekeeping, I've been through 2 smokers now that were new ones that I purchased, and that's way too many. These guys are more forgiving if they get lost, if they get dropped or left out in the rain a couple times. Now we'll bend the lock washers down. There we go. Now I have seen a few AI root smokers where somebody flipped it like this, and I'm not sure why they did. Now here's the real conundrum. Where do we put the hook? Because of how this is, it's not going to hang well on a hive anymore. But we'll figure it out. Now, one of the interesting pieces of hardware, the fact that this uses a brass pin in the front. And I've probably worked with close to 30 of these standard smokers now as part of my hobby, because I'll fix them and I'll gift them out, and I really just love the AI root smokers. But I've only ever seen brass pins inside of copper smokers before. So I'm guessing that day at the factory they just ran out of the tin ones, and now we got these guys. Now if you're looking at a smoker that is AI root and trying to age it, it's really the logo on the back that gives you an indication of what era it comes from. And there is a great article that Mr. Thompson is putting together, I suspect for bee culture, that shows the different varieties. This is the classic one, and there's a slightly older one that has the patent number under it as well, but this is the logo that you'll see on the oldest AI root products, really. You'll see it stamped into some of their honey knives, you'll see it on their extractors, and years ago I had these guys made back when I restored an AI root extractor. So we are going to put this one on there. Alright. Try not to screw this up, because I think we only get one shot. Okay. There we go. Now that looks very beautiful. I like that. Now one of the conundrums is, where do you put the hook? Now, I used to think that the factory was just crazy because I would see them put on in the corner, diagonally, like I have on a few smokers. Sometimes it was prominent right here. There are times that people would attach it to the front up here. It was just all over, and I thought, man, did the factory just not have a rhyme or reason? And it turns out it was never the factory. This came inside of the box with the screws, and you put it wherever you wanted. That's why a lot of smokers are missing them. They never had them to begin with, or the person just left it in the box and tossed it out and didn't include it. So let's put in our little inlet. What I call a breather plate, but they have another name of it that I'm trying to remember. Now these were originally the Cornell smoker for the first few years, which I believe was around like 1902 to 1906, where AI Root then bought the patent for the Cornell and rebranded it the AI Root smoker. And the first Cornell smokers, they had a lovely gooseneck design, and you could see another one of my videos that actually goes over one, and we show what it looked like with the gooseneck version. But eventually they became these. And this has all the credit for changing the way that smokers look. They all essentially look like this now. The only key difference is most smokers now have some type of heat shield to keep you from burning yourself, or to reduce the amount of fires that smokers can cause. So, works again. Has a good burst of air too. Very, very proud of it. And we'll fire this guy up and see what it looks like real quick. Now, I'll tell you what, my wife loves it when I light a smoker in the house. It's already bad enough that as a beekeeper, I usually smell like smoke and beeswax and honey, but here we are. And here we are. It's in good shape. Now I'm going to go dump this out into a sink so I don't burn my house down.